Hello, hello. This is Postgres FM. I'm Nick, Postgres AI, and as usual with me, Michael, PG Mustard. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Nick. How's it going?
Everything is all right. A lot of work. There is a progress on many fronts. So yeah, excited to discuss a quite important topic, and let's see what we can learn from this discussion. I don't know, like mutually learn or something.
Yeah, I'm glad you think it's interesting.
It's interesting because it's always with us. When we deal with performance, we need to work with many numbers, and this topic pops up all the time.
Yeah. So specifically, the topic is when we're looking at latencies or, monitoring or troubleshooting, maybe prioritization, we often need to look at queries by some measure of their duration. Like often, and I see this in blog posts, in tools, various places, often ordered by the mean or the average of their latencies. Very easy to get from pgstat statements, for example. It has a dedicated column. But in a lot of other places, a lot of other, different types of monitoring tools, and I'd say more on the application developer side, I'm seeing increasingly people moving to more monitoring the P95, P99 type latencies, so percentile based, and kind of the tail latencies, not the average. So wondering about that. And yeah, I saw recently another feature request to have the ability to see these in pgstat statements, and I've realized it's something we can approximate, but it's not something we can get from that. So I wrote a post about it recently, and I'm glad you find it interesting too.
Yeah. So that's an important topic, I think, because we all work with averages or mean values all the time, and it's not only about Postgres, right? Mean value, meaning of average is often misunderstood, and it's often misleading. I remember the idea that in any organization, if you check what is the mean salary or average salary, most people might find out it's like in some organizations, oh wow, it's like this average salary is much above my own salary. What's happening here? Well, what's happening? Like a couple of dudes have huge salary. That's why, right? So it means that we, like, when we back to Postgres, back to queries, you see average or mean time is like 1 millisecond. Oh, not bad, right? But how many queries are much above that? It might be a lot. And I must notice that mean time, mean exact time, mean plan time, these columns are redundant. They could be avoided because we always can calculate them dividing total by number of calls, right? Or plans in case of planning time. By the way, I read your article. I noticed you optimistically involve planning metrics.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, 99% of cases we don't see them because they are off by default. And
Yeah.
I remember last year or previous year, it took some effort for us to prove that basically you can turn them on, but unfortunately, as we had episode about this, right? Unfortunately, performance cliff will be 2 times closer to you if you turn it on, right? But again, like default recommendation is to turn it on because it's very valuable information. So again, back to averages, we could always calculate them dynamically or something. It's not a big deal. But I guess it was just a matter of convenience to add them and keep them already pre-calculated in pgstat statements and other similar extensions and so on. But it would be really great to see percentiles, right? Or better to see whole histogram analysis of what's happening. But unfortunately, I guess it's very complex topic. I mean, I know pgstat monitor implements this, but we need to check overhead.
That's the critical part, and also just it's more columns. We've got already a lot of columns in pgstat statements, so it has additional overhead both to tracking but also in terms of user experience. And I mean, I think at this point we have so many columns that why not have a few more?
Yeah.
But it is a problem. Like there are, I think, just-in-time compilation got a bunch of additional columns for every single part of that, and there has been discussion about whether that should be collapsed down, because do we really need granular reporting there?
Yeah.
But yeah, I would be in favor of some histogram stuff. I also haven't yet seen any analysis of, so PGStat monitor is an alternative to PGStat statements, relatively new in the grand scheme of things, probably a few years old at this point, but I don't see it in many installations, and haven't yet seen anybody publish benchmarks on its performance relative to,
It was created in Percona, and I remember I discussed it with Peter Zaitsev, who is the founder of Percona, when this extension was created, and they said instead of contributing to PGStat statements, they wanted a separate, independent release cycle. And as we know, PGStat statements is a part of the set of so-called contrib modules. It means that they are like basically release cycle. It's Postgres its own release cycle, so once per year.
Yes.
And if you want a few times per year to release something, it's hard. And then I know the original creator left Percona, and I don't know what's happening with development of this extension. But when it was created, first look, we did our team. I remember we did some analysis, and early versions looked promising but challenging in terms of performance overhead. And of course, if you talk about RDS and others, they don't have it. I saw it only maybe on one or two platforms. So yeah, and performance overhead is a big question. That being said, I don't know of the current performance overhead. And it would be great to have histograms and so on, right? So percentiles. So yeah, and another thing is two aspects here additionally in my approach. First is that in many cases I don't care about average at all, because this is, as we also discussed several times, depending on our goals, it might be relevant or not, like important or not. For example, if we target to optimize how much resource utilization happens on this server, we care about total time and total values, because this is what exactly shows the picture. Because a query might have very like tiny average, tiny standard deviation, so they're all like similar. All query executions are similar, and planning occurrences are similar, but so many of them, like 10,000 QPS, queries per second. This is going to load our server a lot, and we need to optimize this query in spite of good values in terms of average. Total will be high. So averages, as I feel it, you mostly need it when you target to deliver good experience to your users. So
I think so. You're completely right. Obviously, if we're trying to reduce utilization, there's no point looking at things by how slow they are on average, or even at the extremes at the P99 level, because if they don't run that often, they're not the things taking the most time. So ordering by totals, whether that's time, I still like to do time, or some combination of buffers. If, for example, your resource that you're constrained by is IO, which could be the case, or like if you're paying by IO, like if you're on Aurora or something, ordering by something else could make sense. But yeah, totals always make sense for those cases. But yeah, this is for those other cases where you care about user experience, perhaps, like how long a dashboard's taken to load for a large customer, or the boss has complained, or that kind of thing. Or we've talked a few times about the issues with long-running queries. So you might be investigating, what queries do I even have that run long sometimes? So I think that's the other use case I thought of as, like, why might you want to order by some version of either average or percentile?
Yeah, let me argue with myself, my favorite, my favorite thing. So yeah, when we optimize for resource consumption, lower resource consumption, we look at totals, but at the second step, we should look at average, because we need to decide average and frequency, which multiplied bring us to total, right? So we need to go down and see, is it about too frequent query, or is it about not very frequent but very slow query and decide which optimization methods to apply, right? And in this case, I'm wondering, does it really matter to understand that, like, to look at standard deviation, basically, right? To think about percentiles.
I think you're conflating two things here: looking at something versus ordering by it. And look, yes, when you're looking at resource consumption, you want to look at average time sometimes, but you don't order by it. Crucially, you need to order by total time.
Yeah.
And the same is true for standard deviation. I think I'm talking about adding maybe 1, maybe 2, depending on exactly what percentile you want, adding a couple of standard deviations to the mean to order by it, not necessarily to look at it, but just to get the initial prioritization order. Which things should I start looking at? What are my top 10? Because the order will be different, assuming you have some variance in, distribution of your queries, and some of them have a longer tail than others. The order will be different if you order by mean plus a couple of standard deviations than it would be if you just order by mean.
Yeah.
So it's about the prioritization order, and then you care about looking at a lot of the other columns, but you don't order by them. So I think that's a subtle difference.
Yeah, I agree. Order by standard deviation, it's interesting, right? I'm joking. No,
Yeah.
yeah.
On its own, you mean?
Yeah. I understand you are thinking about ordering, for example, average plus some factor times standard deviation. This is a smart idea, I think. And before we move to that idea, which is explained in your blog post.
Yeah.
So again, like, okay, we order by total time, and then we look to decide which approach to use for optimization. And still, maybe there it also makes some sense to look to have percentiles, for example, because we would understand, this query has this average, which is not that bad, but for example, we don't have percentiles in PGCSS, no histogram. So, but we see, standard deviation is so huge. It means that some occurrences are okay, some are not at all, right? And this brings us to idea, it means that we have instability here, right? Depending on maybe data volumes, or maybe we were blocked by someone. By the way, I would rather prefer to have this information for, different metrics than time, right?
Yeah.
Buffer hits and reads. This is where I would really love to see that piece, standard deviation, or even better, percentiles.
Oh my goodness, I'm just imagining the number of columns at that point.
Yeah, because it always, in PGCS approach, it always concerns me how much of those slowness was associated with query being blocked by another query, just wait time.
Yeah.
We don't know, and it's hidden here.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point that these aggregates are always going to hide information. That it's the nature of aggregations is we don't get all the information. It's the trade-off, right? We get some useful information on aggregate, but we don't get all of the information. I quite often see people include min, mean, and max in their queries they're querying PageStat statements from. So you get kind of the full distribution.
Yeah.
I could imagine adding a couple, like either side of the mean to say, what's the mean minus the standard deviation? What's the mean plus the standard deviation?
Yeah. Without standard deviation, mean and max, they can be some, like you have million calls, but just one of them was so far, and it broke your whole picture, affected your whole picture. While standard deviation brings some good sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess min is possibly more interesting than max. But yeah, of course, sometimes there'll be one parameter that causes the query to run very differently. Yeah.
0 rows returned, we have mean close to 0. It doesn't make any sense, right?
Good point. Yeah.
So
yeah, but by including more, you get a better picture of the distribution. You get more points on the graph to get an idea of quite how is this distributed. Is that max an outlier, or are there quite a few queries running nearly that long? So without some measure close to P95, P99, that kind of thing, I think it's really hard to know that. And I think possibly what's happening at the moment is quite a few of these dashboards, monitoring tools, diagnosis tools, will give you an order when you look at it by mean. That's fine. It's useful, but could be more useful, and you could maybe start at the more problematic queries if you ordered them by a higher percentile and then started at the top from there.
Yeah, because it's not. It's like we say, oh, on average we deliver everything like 10 milliseconds, everything is good, or 1 millisecond again. Like for queries, we want to be below 10 milliseconds ideally. Definitely not 100 milliseconds. It's too much. So we say it's good, but what if almost 50% of that was 1 millisecond, and almost 50 of that was how many? Like no 1 millisecond. Okay.
What did you say the average was?
My method is going to be really bad. I was trying to say you might have two segments or clusters
Like-
of cases. One is very close to zero, another is very bad. And
Like
your
a-
average
like, didn't they call it
in the middle.
like a bimodal distribution?
Yeah,
Perhaps because of a plan, like different plan for different
Yeah.
amounts of
Or
data. Maybe
different
like
parameters, maybe these locking issues. And then you observe something in the middle. Or maybe 50-50 is a bad example because we are going to mean the middle. What if like 70% very close to zero, 30% is very far from zero, and they really struggle with performance, those users, right? And we see average is not bad. It's going to be shifted towards to zero because it's average, not and oh no, it's not going to look okay. Depends, right? So, but average will tell us it's not that bad. We can live with
it's very easy to imagine distributions that on average are less than some threshold that we might not care about, like 50 milliseconds or something. Maybe we set our threshold there. On average, they're 40, 45. But for a non-zero, like a decent number, maybe if it's P95, P99, then we're talking about either 5% or 1% of times it's running for hundreds of milliseconds. And we've talked in the past about
seconds,
or even seconds. Yeah, exactly. So those are noticeable to human durations, even though on average it's running in 45 milliseconds. So it's very easy, I think, to hide things that on average look like they maybe aren't perceptible to humans, but if the tail's long enough, then for quite a lot of people, especially, let's say it's 5% of people, that's 1 in 20 times somebody's loading that dashboard or using that feature. 1 in 20 sounds quite often.
Yeah. It's if it's 1 in 1,000, well, things happen, right?
Yeah.
We can say, okay, we have a very large user base. Some of them, like, we need to take care of everyone, but we cannot, like, it happens, right? But this approach works only if your P99 is good.
Yes.
Okay, 1% is not that good. Okay, but if it happens with 20% of your users, they suffer, and you missed this fact just looking at the average. It's not good. It's not good.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, go back to our example. If you've got two queries, they look the same in terms of average. Let's say one's 45 milliseconds on average, and the other's 50 milliseconds on average. But the one that's 45 has a P99 that's 10 times that, 450 milliseconds, and the one that's 50 milliseconds has a P99 of only 60 milliseconds, so only a little bit higher. I would much, much, much rather start. I'll have it ranked higher, the one that had the higher P99 in that case, even though it has a lower average duration. So that's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, let's explain the idea we had.
Yeah.
The idea is simple. We don't have buckets, we don't have percentiles, we don't have histogram. We cannot draw it, but we have standard deviation. And the idea of how I learned, how I hear it or read it, in that all analysis we have over last years with PG statements and other things, PG K-cache, PG sampling maybe, and so on. We always look at throughput and average latency. That's it. Yeah, we know that the article mentioned that from application side, some monitoring systems, they bring you P99, P95, it's great, or two values even better than just one here. Yeah, and sometimes colorful, good looking graphs, this is great, but in Postgres we don't do it somehow. But we have standard deviation, and in which Postgres monitoring standard deviation is really appreciated? I don't know.
I don't know any,
If we don't have P99 or P95, P90 and nothing like that. But what if we assume we like distribution? Well, your assumption it's normal, it's not normal, like half normal, right? but idea is let's take average and standard deviation and have some multipliers. So we have formulas average plus some multiplier times standard deviation, and we have a kind of P something, P90 something, kind of, right?
Yeah, I called it
Summation.
approximate. Just
Right.
only because it really does assume a normal distribution. Like standard
Yeah,
deviation only
yeah.
makes sense in a like not that it only makes sense. You can only approximate if you assume a normal distribution. And I made the case that I think it would be quite rare for you to have queries that are, or at least problematic queries that are normally distributed. I suspect a lot of the problematic ones are going to have long tails. But it definitely isn't a safe assumption that they're all going to be normally distributed. But once you factor that in, I think this is still useful. I think queries that have a low average and a high standard deviation, where this ordering difference where this change makes a difference, are probably gonna are definitely gonna have high P99s as well. Like it's still directionally correct. I think I used that phrase. So it still points you probably in the right direction. This order is probably not going to be that different to the order by true P99. So it's a step in the right direction. It's not necessarily accurate, but it's directionally correct.
Yeah, I agree. And since I suck at statistics, as every listener already should understand by this point, I talked to my daughter who is learning data science at UCSD right now,
Nice.
and she told me, oh, this is like quite known, like I think she
Yeah.
said P95 or something for normal distribution. We just standard deviation times 2 to both sides. This is how you can get P90, she said, or P95. I forgot. Like, yeah, so it's like, oh, this is reasonable, she said. But then, like, of course, it's not normal distribution, and it's a big assumption. And what I thought, like, idea number one I had, and maybe I will encourage some, I don't know, like some students or some people who are willing to do something here. What if we had some raw data from somewhere? I don't know who can afford the logging all queries with duration. Since we talked last week, we talked how dangerous it can be to log all queries. But imagine we collected some raw data and we see what's present in persistent statements. And what I'm trying to say, we could understand distribution nature, maybe observing many cases from All2P, like web apps, mobile apps. And then we could probably find some heuristic-based multiplier, right, which would serve like closer to reality. I don't know, like to avoid this assumption that it's normal. But it's a big work. I know, like you need to collect a lot of data, process it, and so on. What do you think?
Well, and it would be different for different query. Like unless we find out that it's just, I think it's a tricky problem unless you actually approximate it while you're monitoring.
Look, I understand what you said.
Yeah.
No, but so if we take assumption it's kind of normal, it sounds for me like fragile assumption. If we learn how some OLTP system, social media or something, with all its queries, like select to user, select to something, join some tables, like and so on, how these queries behave, at least, I don't know, like a few dozens of them, how they behave. This like practice learned multiplier, I'm pretty sure it will be in another system, it will be very close. You know?
Yeah, actually, it's a good point. You could get more accurate with the number, like the exact multiple to get a more likely to be P99 measure. It might turn out that the number I've suggested based on normal distribution is actually more likely to be a P96 than a P99, or P97 instead of P99. Does it make that much difference?
No. If I just order by, no, I agree with you. And what I'm proposing, it breaks Pareto principle, right?
It's a lot of work for arguably not that much additional. Like I think if someone's going to put a lot of effort into this, it'd be much better to actually track this and put it into PeachStat statements rather than
this
try.
will be this like
Yeah.
again overhead question. It would be great to have, but overhead. But again, okay, I understand. What I'm proposing is going to be outside of P80 of the effort we're going to have. Or
I
P20,
like it.
P20. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or P80 of the value, P20 of. Okay. So another thought I have. I noticed over time that when I run some benchmarks, very often with pgbench, I'm like absolutely unsatisfied with. So I use we have it in automation as well. Like all my team members use it. So I have lowercase r to report the results in the end for each statement used in transactions. Right. Sometimes we use multiple files with different transactions and like with some weights assigned to them. It can be achieved with option F and @ sign. It's a great feature, by the way, underappreciated. But anyway, I see these reports and we discuss them and like, oh, this looks great. Oh, looks not that great. But I realized it's not enough. I want histograms, right?
Yeah.
And to mitigate it, at least somehow, we started to use capital P option. For example, P30. It means like every 30 seconds, it will be reported.
Oh, interesting. Different P notation. Yeah.
Yeah. So it will be reported at progress. So it reports latencies every 30 seconds, for example.
Nice.
Or every 10 seconds if benchmark is very fast, or every minute if it's long, depends. And from there, we already understand, distribution is like this, right? So we can feel some distribution. It reports, by the way, a standard deviation as well, but it's still not enough. And there I also but there is another aspect here, not only about like distribution of P90, P95. It's also about the distribution in time, over time, because there might be a spike of latency, right? And then it's better.
True.
So yeah. But still, like I think what I was trying to say, like actually, there is an idea to implement histograms or percentiles. Maybe it's better to start in pgbench. Yeah, not in pgstar statements first.
Yeah, interesting idea. I hadn't thought. I get where you're coming from. I think it'd be easier, right? You don't worry so much about.
Well,
overheads
you worry about overhead, but this is tool which used to make decisions and so on. Like, well, pgstar statements also is used, but anyway, like maybe it's easier because it's less risky. The idea is it's not production. So
Are you thinking it's more like, are you thinking educationally we could see the idea that this is a useful thing, and once people start seeing it, like, this is really helpful, why can't I have it elsewhere? So it kind of builds.
Yeah, I think most of people understand that this is helpful, but it's just risky because pgstar statements have overhead, we know it, and it's probably increasing because more and more things are being added. And just again, pgstar statements, it's not about production. Usually, it depends, of course. And I
You
think
mean pgbench is not about?
it's not used in production. It's a learning tool for experiments. Pgstar statements is for production, so it's harder to bring something heavy there, right?
Yeah, I agree.
pgbench, again, like optionally, and see how it works. Like it's easier in my opinion, and it's also like first of all, it's needed there. It's needed.
Yeah.
It's very useful to have it there. It would be very useful. Do you know if Sysbench is bringing histograms or not?
Oh, no, I don't know.
I don't remember. Yeah, it brings percentiles and histograms.
Nice.
So yeah.
How many buckets, or which?
I don't know.
Just report a couple.
It brings P95.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't see anymore. I don't know. Anyway, it's already better than just standard deviation, I guess, right? But I agree with your point. If we order by just like maybe just 2 times standard deviation, okay.
I did, yeah. In the blog post, I did consider rounding just to 2 instead of using the one that's actually an approximation of
2.33.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm at that point, I'm saying, look, this is approximate already. Why are you multiplying by such a specific number? But then, what are we approximating? It's like a different p-value, and I just didn't really. I thought it would just be confusing as a kind of to people, like people reading the results rather than people looking at the query. I figured more people would probably end up, if you put these into dashboards and things, you're going to have more people reading the dashboards than looking at the queries behind the dashboards. So I figured I'd rather have something confusing in the query than something confusing in the column header.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, quite strange to use such a precise figure to calculate an approximation.
You know what? I will think about next time we will maybe to do some reports or dashboards. Maybe we will implement this approach. We'll call it P ?
I suggested like calling it approx P99, just so that it's really clearly like you're leading with the word approximate. So it's
mysterious percentile. This is
yes. But and even if you don't include, like, it's probably confusing to look at a dashboard that doesn't include it in the results, but still include all the other columns that you're going to include. Just ordering by that is then, I think, a useful.
Ordering means in monitoring. It means another chart. You like
exactly
top n by what, and this is ordering. And instead of top n by average, or in addition to top n by average, this would be helpful to bring sense of how users feel about your service, right?
And I really respect monitoring tools and reports that try and limit the number of pages they or dashboards they show, but most I come across don't seem to try and limit it too much. So I think what's another chart? But if you are worried about quite how many charts you have, I might argue that I'd rather have. Well, my argument is I'd rather have this than the one ordered by mean, which pretty much all of them include. So if you're including that one, I would rather have this one.
Yeah, and do you think it's worth keeping a chart for average, pure average, or no?
Again, depends on the constraints, right? If you've already got 100 charts and you're showing, it's 99 versus 100, why not include the average still? Yeah. But if you're talking about only having 2, then 2 versus 3 is quite a big difference. So I think it depends on the content.
And this chart is going to be regular, like not non-stacked, because you cannot summarize this. Like it's not a cumulative thing, averages, right? So,
yeah,
and probably it should include only like 10 or something.
It's not really a chart. It's just like a top N.
Table.
Yeah, like a I think so.
Chart also matters. Like again, table is good, but it loses historical information.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe your chart is your most important queries looking at their P99 over time, but then you can include the mean on the same chart, can't you? I've seen those in monitoring tools where you're looking at the same.
For the chart, we can get average for a specific period, just dealing with total and calls. We have delta for total, delta for calls. We can have pure average for a specific period of time. But what about standard deviation? We don't have it. And
you can calculate it using deltas, but the same way PGStat statements recalculates it every time it has a new query come in.
Oh yeah.
So
indeed,
it's. Yeah, I was looking at the source code. I was like, "Oh, that's clever."
Yeah. Exactly. Otherwise, yeah, exactly.
But you also have the option of like snapshotting PGStat statements. Some people do that, right? Reset snapshot, like some monitoring tools or some providers reset it regularly.
It's not a good idea because to do it often, you will going to have troubles under load because it doesn't come for free to add new entries.
Well, then we have deltas. Deltas is a good idea.
Yeah. Well, and standard deviation can be also understood for a specific period of time, and in this case, you can have this metric with like magic, mysterious percentile, and you can have a chart of, for example, 10, the top 10 queries. Yeah, and maybe also average of everything. Plus standard deviation of everything. Why not? So
well, actually, it's a good point. Of like, there are a couple of I don't even know if I mentioned this in the blog post, but there's at least one major caveat here. Is a lot of people have a timeout, often like 30-second statement
Not
timeout,
registered
or
by PGSL statements.
it won't be registered. So it does quite seriously affect those
Yes.
metrics like the max, the standard deviation, and
Affects in which way? It's not registered, so you miss it there.
you miss it. You miss an outlier. So it's bringing the average down. It's bringing the P99.
Looks more positive than it is.
Yes.
But you know, like if query was cancelled, job is not done, we don't count it. As I remember, this is another point PGStat monitor aims to solve.
Oh,
Yes. Like, it's a common problem with PGStat statements and all its friends, like PGStat Kcache, that cancelled queries are not counted. And I think also a big missing piece here, honestly, is that in PGStat database we have TPS, two metrics, committed, rolled back, right? But we don't have QPS, we don't have latencies,
Yeah.
standard deviation. It should be there, actually. This is another idea to register, like, these metrics, calls, mean, max, and mean, average, and standard deviation at PGStat database level for everything, right? Regardless of PGStat statements. And maybe involving errored out queries. Maybe I'm not sure, because this is if we involve them, the values observed by PGStat statements, and at this high level, they won't match at all.
yeah. I was unsure what like ideal looks like here. I did wonder about, should, you know, in an ideal world, would you add the timeout? Like, would you add a query took 30 seconds? If it, let's say one got cancelled at 30 seconds, would you add an instance of a query that ran 30 seconds and then add that to the average, add that to the standard deviation? Would you want that, or would you not want that?
It's easy. Let's just have another PGStat statement. We'll call it PGStat error statements, and have the whole set of metrics. I'm joking, of course, but
Whoa, it's not a bad idea though, right? Like, how many of each error type do we have? Like,
and query
I think
can
that's
be
cool.
cancelled before statement timeout. It can be cancelled due to deadlock timeout,
True.
for example,
True.
or just something else happens. I don't know. Kill. PG cancel backend, for example, came, cancelled us. So yeah, and it would be great to count all those things like buffer hits, reads, and
Yeah.
so on.
So yeah, that's the long and short of it. Was there anything else you wanted to
I
talk
feel
about?
we went to some very dark corner of Postgres observability, you know?
Yeah. It definitely seems less explored than I was expecting. As your daughter said, this is not a novel. Like, this is not an out there revelation. I was just surprised when I saw the like feature request for it, and I've heard it a few times. I was thinking, why don't we add, like, why don't more people have that in their queries? Why don't I see this in blog posts or in monitoring tools?
And
or in
also for buffer operations and wall operations.
Well, I know why we don't have that is because it's not, the standard deviation is not even available there.
Well, it should be available. Let's add it.
So yeah, my summary is I'd love to see these in PGStat statements, but in the meantime, like you mentioned, if you're doing a consulting report or if you've got a dashboard internally, consider adding this, like, or replacing the ordering by mean.
Just don't call it fake P95. Call it mysterious PN.
Fake news P99. Yeah, I liked your mysterious. What was it? MMP.
Magic P.
Yeah, mysterious magic P.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Good.
Nice one, Nikolai. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.